Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. My name is Dennis Chow, the organizer of this meetup. Today, we're talking GA4. We were talking before we started, and I think a lot of us don't have much experience with GA4. A few of us do, but Kyle Akerman sure does. Kyle is a Chicago-based web analytics consultant. He's prepared a presentation on GA4, and I think many of us will be learning a lot. I know I will. So Kyle, hope you're well, and thanks for joining. You may take things over from here.
All right, let me just get the tech side of this done. So I'm going to share my screen, do this, go into presenter mode. All right, can everybody see that intro slide?
Yep, looks good.
All right, perfect. Let's get started. So this is the intro to GA4, or otherwise known as Google Analytics 4. Kind of what you need to know about this new analytics platform. So if you're meeting me for the first time and want to put a name to a face, this was me at some point during COVID when I let my hair grow out. Now I've been bouncing back and forth, so now this is me normally with a lot shorter hair, but it's been kind of fun to let that go for a while. So you probably didn't even know it, but we're actually having a party today. We are celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Google Analytics 4, I should say, Google Analytics 4. Officially, I think tomorrow is the 1-year birthday. Don't be worried if you haven't heard about GA4 until now. It's that's been part of the problem, is the messaging around it has not been great. But it is a new platform that Google introduced, came out of beta a year ago. It actually existed a little bit before that in beta form, but that's kind of where we are now. So to kind of set the stage a little bit, here's just a few of the questions that I get about the platform and that you probably have. First of all, what is it? What is GA4? When do I need to start using GA4? Do I have to use GA4? Is Universal Analytics going away? And Universal is the current one. I might refer to it as GA3 occasionally. I don't know if that's an official name, but should I remove Universal Analytics from my website? This is a very important one we're going to get to later. This is an important one too. Can I merge data from Universal Analytics and GA4? So one of the things that's been confusing is Google's own messaging about GA4. So an email that I got just this week from Google promoting GA4, here's what it is. And I highlighted some things that I really don't agree with. So they claim Google Analytics 4 is fully ready, not true, for you to use in place of your existing setup. Again, not true. And they're saying that it should become the core of your measurement. I disagree with all of those things, and we'll address some of those points. So the goals I have for you today is we're going to do a high-level introduction to the platform. I'm not going to go too deep into every report and every feature, and because it's a brand new platform and there's a lot of new things. Some things are still missing, but there's just a lot. I also want to show you how to set it up so you can start collecting data, because that's an important thing you're going to want to do. So some of the topics we're going to hit on today is what GA4 is, why it was created. We're going to talk about the new event-based measurement model, because it collects data differently than the current Google Analytics. I'll show you how data is organized, all the different reports. The menu interface is completely different, so it takes some getting used to. We'll talk about the analysis capabilities, because that is a cool new feature they added that is actually super useful once you figure out how to use it. And then, like I said, we'll show you how to set up GA4 to start collecting data. So I'm a big fan of this idea of one thing. And what I mean by that is I'm going to throw a lot of information at you today. So if you can just latch on to one thing that you're like, hey, I'm going to remember that, and make a note of that one takeaway from this. That's all I can ask for today. So let's begin with the big question. What is Google Analytics for? Well, Google is calling it the future of analytics, and it is for them. Some of the things that it's doing is it is now allowing you to measure multiple devices and platforms. So that means basically app plus web. So before, if you had an app and wanted to see the metrics for that, you had to use Google's Firebase tool. And then if you were looking at websites, you would use Google Analytics. Well, now you can combine those data in one place. GA4, it's made to kind of address a lot of these privacy issues that are new and have been the last couple of years. There's a more intelligent experience. So this tool is incorporating a lot more machine learning to try to give you insights. And a big thing, if you are a power user, you now have access to all of your raw data, and that's through Google's BigQuery platform. Previously, if you wanted this, you had to purchase GA360, which is like $150K a year, I think. So these are some of the things around what the new tool is. I get asked a lot, is it an upgrade? Technically, it is an upgrade, but I don't necessarily like that term, because an upgrade kind of implies that it's 80% the same, and then they just made some improvements. But these aren't improvements. These are like a complete reinvention. Like they kind of blew it up and started over. So I wanted to give you a quick timeline just to kind of give you an idea of how all this has been developed. So back in 2005, Google purchased a tool called Urchin. It was an analytics tool, and Google bought it back then basically as a way to measure its ad performance. So that was all the way back in 2005. And if you can remember that far back, there was no iPhone, there was no tablets, there was no apps, and very few social networks. So the digital world was completely different. So then in 2008, we got classic analytics, and then 2013 was a slight upgrade of that, universal, and then now, so a year ago, 2020 is when GA4 kind of came out of beta, and in fact, you might have seen it referred to as app plus web, which was a very clunky name. So they rebranded it when they took it out of beta, and they called it GA4. So let's talk about just some high level reasons why now? Why was this created? Well, the current platform is fine for a world that just has websites, and then a world with just computers, because you have websites, you have pages, and you're on one device. It's pretty straightforward. But does it still work in a world with websites and apps, and in a world with computers, cell phones, tablets, all these different things that we are now consuming content on? So some direct quotes from Google. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I highlighted the GA4 has machine learning at its core. And that's going to help you get a better understanding of customers across devices and across platforms, i.e. web and app. Google also says that it's a privacy-centric platform by design. And that's to help address changes like restrictions on cookies, and they're going to and which are creating gaps in your data, and GA4 is going to try to fill in some of those gaps with some of that machine learning and stuff. Some of the ways that they're able to get better about cross-device platforming is with this idea. They have these things called identity spaces or user identifiers. There's three main ones they use. There's a user ID, which was actually used on the previous version of analytics. That's a persistent ID that you would set up if people can log in to your website. There's also Google Signals, which is information that comes from people that are actually signed into Google, so signed into Gmail or any other Google platform. And then there's the device ID. So if you're using Chrome, there's data that goes along with that, and there's an ID so they can kind of personally track you, whether you go on a cell phone or on your computer or whatnot. So using all those together, the way they help, previously in universal analytics, you just kind of had one identifier, and the problem with that was a single person. If I came to your site on a computer and then went on my mobile device, well, I look like two people. So now with these multiple identity spaces, they can more accurately track cross-device, cross-platform users. So if I am jumping around on devices, they can stitch that together and say, yep, that's just Kyle. And you get a clearer picture of user data. So need to discuss the new data model. And this isn't going to get, well, for some of you, it might be technical, but I'm not going super technical, I don't think. But you need to understand what they're measuring now and how it changed. So first, how did universal analytics measure things? It basically measured sessions. So that's a time-based unit. So sessions is a visit, basically, and then hits. And that can be like an e-commerce hit, a page view hit, or an event hit. But the new platform, they use events. So every single action you take on a website now is just an event. And then those events can have parameters. So to give you a more visual picture of that, this is the old universal analytics. So you have a user, and then they have, when you hit a website, then a visit starts or a session. And then you can have these pink things that are hits. So you can have an e-commerce hit, page view hit, and then the old version of events where you had like category, action, and label. Now, in the way it differs in GA4 is, so here I'm a user, it's Kyle. I come to the website and an event fires. And every action I take on the site is logged as an event. And then if I need more information about that specific event, that's in what's called a parameter. So that's the big difference between the way they collect data. And this event model allows analytics to be a lot more flexible and scalable, and they can perform calculations a lot faster. One of the important things you need to know, though, is because these two data models are different, that means they're incompatible, which means you can't combine your data. So at some point, you're going to have to most likely completely cut over to GA4. Now, that could be a couple years from now, but it may happen. So it's just something to think about. If you need kind of a metaphor, I was trying to come up with different ways to visualize this. So maybe you could think of universal analytics as like a car, and GA4 more like a plane. Like, you're not going to store those. Most of us aren't going to store those in the same garage. They have different, they're completely different vehicles. They perform the same service and that they get you from point A to point B, but they're very different. So that might be a way to kind of quickly think of some of the differences. So let's dig a little bit into these events, this idea of everything being an event. Like, what is that? So an event is a distinct action that happens at a distinct time It's usually applied or tied to a user that's either in your app or on your website. So some very simple examples are page view. So page view is now an event. If you have an app, it's called screen view. If you e-commerce and maybe I add something to the cart, that's an event. If I submit a form submit. So, that's what events are. And then along with events, we have this idea of parameters. So it's just a way to store additional information about a specific event. They provide context into, kind of what, where, and how that event was fired. And you can have up to 25 parameters per event. So for you all, I wanted to provide kind of a content example. So say you have an event called content view, parameters that you might use could be like the article ID, if it had like a number, the article title, and maybe the author name. So now you'll be able to search on those and filter by those within your analytics platform. Now there's a number of default parameters that GA4 collects for every single event. And some of those are language, page location, that's basically the URL path. Page referrer, that's the previous page. Page title, that's pretty obvious. And then like screen resolution is the size of the screen. Now there's 4 different types of events. There's automatically collected ones. There's enhanced measurement events. There's recommended events, and then there's custom events. So I'm going to quickly explain those so you just kind of get a high level understanding of those. So automatically collected ones, I mean, I mentioned a few of them, but they're things that are triggered by basic interactions. So things like page view, screen view, if you have an app, click. There's an event called first visit, session start, user engagement. We're going to dive more into engagement because that is a big change to the platform too. If you if you start digging into this, you should really heavily rely on a lot of the Google documentation. So when you look up events and look up the automatically triggered ones, this is just there's more than this, but here's what you'll see in the docs. So you'll see the event in the first column, and then they tell you how it's triggered, and then they give you the parameters that go along with it. So you can get an idea of what data is being collected. And not all of these are doing what you think they might do. So for perfect example, they have an event called scroll. If you've ever set that up in the current analytics, you're probably measuring like a scroll to like, 25%, 50%, 75%, like down the page. Well, this default event, when you read, when it's triggered, it only fires when somebody's gone 90% of the way down your page. That might not be the granularity you want. So some of these things you need to really see, well, what is it measuring? Then we have these enhanced measurement events. And these are things that Google tried to make easy for you. Some basic actions that a lot of people might want to measure. And I'm going to show you this in the setup, but you can easily turn these on without a lot of setup on your part. So what these are, page view is just on by default, so you don't have to worry about that one. But there's scroll, which I just explained, outbound clicks, site search, if your site has that feature, video engagement, if you have videos on your site and want to measure that performance. Actually, I should get more specific. That's YouTube videos are easy to measure through this. If you use Vimeo or something else, you're going to have to do some customization. File downloads. And then where you'll see this in the setup is, and we're going to look at this page later, you'll see in this enhanced measurement, and you can go and toggle these on and off. So they make it pretty easy if it's something you want to measure. So then we have recommended events. So there's a whole bunch of these. I think there's about maybe 50 of these, maybe more. These are ones that Google is saying, hey, you might want to use this depending on what your site does. So some examples are first visit, session start, video start. But most of these are not automatically sent to the platform. It's kind of like they're being measured in the background, but Google's like, hey, if you want to use these in your reports, you have to like do something to add them. So that's, I don't know how I feel about that, but it's nice that they have recommended events. And one thing to keep in mind is you'll try to, if there's an action you want to measure, you're going to want to go into their list of recommended events and see if they have one that kind of does what you want to do. And if so, you just use what they have. You won't create a custom event. So again, when you go into Google Docs, you can look up recommended events. This is just one section. They recommend these for all businesses, perhaps. You know, like here's an example, you know, you could use the event sign up, and you could use that for many different things. It could be sign up for my newsletter, sign up for a demo. Like you can, you know, kind of tweak it to measure what you want people on your site to sign up for. We've got this, and then we've got this idea of custom events. So you can use these if you need to change or slightly modify an existing event, or if you want to create a brand new one. So you can rename an event. You can maybe fix a typo that's causing a measurement error. And you can trigger a brand new event based on conditions that you set. One thing to know about events is there's a kind of a strict naming convention that you have to follow. It has to be all lowercase. So, you know, if you wanted to track purchase, it would be purchase with a lowercase p, not capital P. And then if you have multiple words, they have to be separated with an underscore. So it would be, you know, add to cart would be like this with underscores, not add to cart with spaces or dashes or anything like that. So just something to keep in mind. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Before you create any custom events, you definitely want to review everything that's available already that Google has, because they already have the parameters set up. And, you know, think of it as like an off-the-shelf thing. Like if they have an event that'll measure what you want to do, just use that event. Because if you try to create your own to do the same thing, you might be able to replicate it, but you might screw it up too. So you're going to review the list of automatically collected events, enhanced measurements, recommended events. And if none of them will do what you want to do, then you can think about creating your own. And the way that I recommend people create these events is in Google Tag Manager. And one of the issues with GA4 that makes it a little more complex is you have to kind of understand a little bit of how to use Google Tag Manager, because you will use it along with GA4 in some of your implementations. So it's just another layer of technical marketing you might have to try to figure out. So if you're creating a new event, they have a tag called the GA4 event tag. So you would click on that, and then you would go through and you give your name your event a meaningful name. You select your config tag, which I'll explain in the setup section. You give it a descriptive name. If you want to add any parameters, you can add them in here. And then you have to set triggering conditions. So like, when will this event, when do I want it to happen, basically? So the most basic trigger is all pages. So you might say, do this thing every time somebody goes to a new page. That's a very basic one. A lot of your triggers will be more specific than that though. All right, so let's talk about how to set up GA4. So there's two parts to it. There's the what you have to do in the interface of analytics, and then there's what you have to do with implementing code. Because without code on your website, it won't measure anything. So the first thing you need to understand is kind of the hierarchy of how this works. So GA4 has a count at the highest level, and then you have a property, and then you have these new things they've introduced called data streams. Basically like a source of data. So you can have your website and you can have an app. So those are the two types of streams. The current version of analytics doesn't have streams. So this is a new thing. So when you go into your analytics to create a new GA4 property, you would come up here, click the big blue button for create property. It's going to take you to a screen like this. You'll go in and you give it a meaningful name. I always like to put GA4 at the start of it and then dash and then whatever you want to call it. Just because because this is going to show up in the same place as your universal property, and I want to be able to quickly distinguish the two. You'll go through and just check some boxes telling Google about the size of your company and some other stuff. And then you're going to come to a screen where you'll add these data streams like I was talking about. So most of you, if you're just measuring a website, you'll just click on this web button here. But if you have apps too, you would click on Android or iOS. You can add both. And then here you'll give your stream a name. So if it's a web stream, you just put in the name of your website. Give it a meaningful name over here. And then here are those things that I referenced earlier, those enhanced measurements. So these are things Google's like, hey, you might want to just turn these on because they're super easy to turn on and we think you're going to use it. So the way this is how it looks if you click on that. So page views is on by default. Here's that scroll I talked about. If you want to measure outbound clicks, here's video engagement. Again, if you read close, it's just for YouTube, and file downloads. So you can click on these and it's set up for the most part. There's very little you need to do beyond that. So once you've set up your GA4 property, you'll get a measurement ID. So the way in universal analytics, your ID was always UA dash something. So now in GA4, it's G dash and then a whole bunch of letters and numbers. So that's how you can kind of tell these apart. If you're like, wait, is this GA4 or is this universal? Now, when I created that web stream, when I'm in this menu, I'll just see the single stream. But if you do have apps that you want to add to this too, here's kind of what that would look like. So this is Google's demo account. So here's their Android app stream, here's iOS, and then here's their website. So, you can have all three. One thing you'll notice though, once you create this up, is this right-hand column is completely empty. And that's where you used to have views in universal analytics. Well, there is no concept of a view in GA4. I should say yet. A lot of people in the analytics community are hoping that they add this, but we don't know if they will. So views were a nice way to kind of separate some of your data, but it's not available now. So that's just something to know that's different. To continue in the setup, there's an area called more tagging settings. You'll want to click in there. And here's where there's a lot of things that you may have done in Universal. So cross-domain tracking, you can set up here, and they've made it really easy to do. If you have more than one website, but you kind of want to merge the tracking between the two, you basically just enter the two websites and then it should work. So they've simplified that greatly. If you want to filter out any of your internal traffic, you can do that here. If you want to exclude referral traffic, you would do that in this one. And if you need to adjust how long a session is, so currently the default is like previous, it's 30 minutes. 30 seconds would be bad. It's 30 minutes, but you can adjust that if that makes sense for your setup. Another setting that's different is your data retention capabilities. They've greatly reduced this. So this kind of goes to that idea of privacy. The most you can store data now is 14 months. But in the current analytics, you can save up to like 3 or 4 years worth of data. So I recommend, just because I like having the most data possible, I recommend 14 months. And then if you read this text here, the clock gets reset every time the same person comes back to your site. So even though it says 14 months, because of the way that works, that could almost be, if somebody's visiting your site all the time, you'll be tracking them forever because you'll never get to this 14-month point. But anyway, this is kind of their way to limit how much data you can store on people. So this kind of the part 2 of this, we've set it up in the interface. Now we have to go and implement some code if we want to make this work. So I really highly recommend you use Google Tag Manager to do this. I'm not going to go too in depth about that. I'm going to show you this specific tag. But if you need Tag Manager help, you can ping me later. So they've made it pretty easy. There's a GA4 config tag. So this is a screenshot within Tag Manager. So you're going to click on this. And then what you do is you name your tag. I like to just call it GA4 config. If you've done this for Universal, this tag is very similar to the Google Analytics page view tag. And then you would enter that measurement ID number right in here, that G- number. Make sure this is checked. I think it is by default that you want to send a page view event. And then you set your trigger to all pages. And then once you do that, you'll be collecting data in GA4. Now, I mentioned before that this data is not combined. So this GA4 data will go to a separate property from your Universal. I might just start calling it GA3. The data is going to be sent to 2 different places. So you can run these in parallel, and you should. And we'll expound on that point a little bit later. So I want to talk about how is all this data organized within GA4? What does the reporting structure look like? So the first thing that you should know in Universal Analytics was there was hundreds of reports. Maybe not hundreds, but definitely over 100. And that caused a lot of people just frustration because, where do I begin? The good thing about GA4, there's like maybe 20 reports, 20 to 30. So they really scaled it back. Now, kind of the trade-off is they ramped up the amount of customization you can do. So in a way, they reduced some complexity and added a whole bunch of other complexity. Because if you want to do more advanced stuff, you might have to do a lot of customization. So the way the reports are structured, it's kind of a 2-tiered menu structure. So the top level menu, you have 4 big buckets. So you've got reports, which is what you might think it is, your basic reports. Explore is it's a analysis module. For a while, they actually called it analysis, but they changed the name recently to Explore. Advertising. This is a slight misnomer because yes, you can find your advertising information in here, but it's also if you want to do like attribution modeling, all of that stuff lies in here. And then you have a configure section, which is where you kind of, set up events, conversions, audiences, a lot of things like that. So reports, that section, that's going to help you answer like who, what, where, when, the actions and results on your website. The explore reports, they're going to help you answer why things are happening. Like I said, the advertising, that's where your attribution model comparisons live. You can see conversion paths. And then if you're running Google ads, all of that will be in there. And then configure is where you, modify like events, conversions, audiences, custom dimensions, that kind of thing. So let's tackle the reports and see if we can kind of make some sense of this. So in universal analytics, we had this idea of the ABC reports. So that was acquisition, behavior, conversions. So that was a pretty easy mnemonic to remember. Unfortunately, we don't have that in GA4. We have one of the things, basically. So here's the GA4 menu. Now, so I'm in the reports. So here's what I was talking about. Here are those 4 top-level menus. I'm in the reports section. So under that, they have an area called life cycle and an area called user. So this is kind of what maps to that ABC we knew before. So you've got acquisition. This is new. It's called engagement. And then you've got monetization. So, and then there's a retention section. So if we kind of put these side by side, in universal, we had acquisition, behavior, conversions. Here's kind of these 4 in GA4. So acquisition, it pretty much parallels what you would think. A lot of the things that were in behavior are now in this engagement menu. Monetization is all e-commerce. So if you don't have an e-commerce site, you'll never look in this section. And then retention is kind of, if you're working on kind of that, keeping customers. So there's cohort analysis in there, lifetime value, that kind of thing. So if you're never worried, if you don't work on retention, then you'll probably never go into those reports. So just to kind of hammer that idea home, acquisition, that's the kind of where did people come from? Engagement is what are they doing on your site? And monetization is, how is your e-commerce working? So let's expand this out a little bit. This is what you'll see if you click on the arrows for all of those reports. I didn't do a side-by-side with universal, but universal reports would be about 2 more pages of this many reports. So like I said, they've greatly reduced the number of reports. So let's dive into these a little bit. In the easy for me to say, in the acquisition section, that's where you're going to find out how people find your site or your app. So sources, mediums, campaigns, how are you acquiring users? So here is kind of what these reports look like, and they're all going to look very similar, and it's probably going to be a little foreign to you. All the reports have like these cards, like these separate cards here. So here I'm in the acquisition overview report. Now, up here is where you have where you select your date range. That is completely different too. So what that looks like, this is kind of blown up here, but you have a lot more choices than you did in the other version of analytics. You can, quickly choose like this week, last 7 days, last 30 days, 90, 12 months. And then you can do custom, you can highlight over here. This is scrollable and you can highlight what you want to do. So a lot more freedom in the date range selector. And then in these cards that I told you about, you can drill down by clicking into these, these little blue links will send you deeper into another report, basically. So that's kind of how all of these reports operate. They tried to keep a very similar visual look. They have both user acquisition and traffic acquisition reports. So here's an example of some things you might see. You're going to see like a time graph, and then you'll see a bar graph. I don't really find these super useful, but it's in there. But as you would scroll down on this report, you start to see something that maybe looks a little more familiar. So, we're kind of used to seeing these tables. So these are your traffic sources here. And then if you see the gray bar here, this is scrollable to the right. So there's a lot of other things to the right. And some of those things get into the engagement metrics. So I'm going to zoom in on that right now. So GA4 is big on measuring engagement. So big, in fact, that it is the replacement for bounce rate. So if bounce rate was an important metric for you, you might experience a little shock because it does not exist in GA4. Instead, you have this idea of engagement rate. So you get things like engaged sessions, average engagement time, and engaged users. So, you're probably wondering, well, how do they define engagement? So there's basically 3 criteria. If it meets one of these 3, if I come to your site or your website, if it lasts 10 seconds or longer, then it counts that as an engaged visit. If 1 or more conversion events are triggered, it's considered an engaged visit. And if there's 2 or more page views or screen views, if it's an app, that is an engaged visit. So that's something you're going to have to, kind of change your thinking around, if you really, used bounce rate to get you insights. Now you've got this idea of engagement and engagement rate and engaged sessions. So, okay, now I'm going to go into the engagement reports section. That's where you can find your events and information about pages and screens. So over here, we're in the engagement section. This is kind of similar to the behavior report group of reports in Universal Analytics. So in here, you can see all of your events. So those would all show up here. You can get information on those events over here. And then there's so goals, they're no longer called goals. Everything's called a conversion. So, you might hear people use those words interchangeably, but in GA4, you'll only see the term conversions. So these are the actions that are important for your business to measure. And these could be macro conversions or they could be micro. So some examples, purchase is a big one, especially if you have an e-commerce site. First visit, this is just an example from a site that I grabbed, but you can make anything a goal a conversion, and I'll show you how to do that. If you're looking for more information about, especially, if you're a content creator and you want to know how your content's doing, this pages and screen report is where you will kind of find what you're used to seeing. Unfortunately, the default, if you look in this column, it's the page title. So a lot of times that's not that useful, but there is a way to change it. So there's a pull down menu here. So what you can do is if you want to see the URL of the page, just change that setting to page path. It's a long thing, plus query string and screen class, but it'll give you your URL. So if you're tracking like blogs, and you want to see /blog, whatever the post name, here's where you'll do this. So this is similar to your all content report in Universal Analytics. And then you've got the, I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly. The monetization reports, that's basically e-commerce. You'll find all your e-commerce in that section. This retention, you'll find everything about new and returning users. You can look at cohorts, lifetime value. I don't want to go too deep into that now. And I was talking about customization. They have a whole section, and this just came out in August, so this is only a couple months old. It's called the library. You can create your own collections of reports. So like this life cycle, Google is calling that a collection, and this user, that's a collection. So right here, I've got this one called Kyle's Test, because I kind of wanted to just test this feature out. So you can go in and kind of create your own reports, and it'll show up here in this left-hand menu. Again, it's a lot of customization. Like, you have to know how to set up those reports and group them together. And so it's not just, you know, point and click. But once you get more familiar with the platform, this could be a powerful way to just put in here what you need to see. Because honestly, a lot of these default reports, they're not very useful yet. And that's why if you see people complaining about the platform, a lot of it is around that the reports just aren't that useful. And I don't know if that's gonna improve or not. But moving on, the stuff that is useful is this explore group. It used to be called analysis. And it is a really powerful feature that really is a big jump up from GA3. So when you go into this explorations, you'll see these things called explorations. You can do a completely blank one. They have a thing called freeform. And these are the two that are really great. This funnel exploration and path exploration. So I'm going to just kind of quickly show you some of these so you can get a feel for what's available. So what you need to know about all of these explorations is kind of this left-hand side here, because these are kind of like your puzzle pieces that you'll use to put together what you want to see in the right-hand side. So when you open up this freeform one, this is the default. But I just wanted to show you kind of these puzzle pieces. So here you've got segments, you've got dimensions, and then you have your metrics. And then what you'll do is you'll just slide these over to, if you want to see any of them in the rows or the columns or the metrics you want to see, you'll just slide these over here, and then they'll populate this report. So it's pretty powerful. Now, the tricky part is these are just the default ones, but you're probably going to want to add a lot of other ones. So you would have to click on these plus menus and start choosing from in there. So not going to dive deep into that today because we could do an entire session just on that. But I just want you to be aware of kind of how this operates. So the ones that are really awesome is this funnel exploration. And there were some basic funnels in Universal, but it wasn't very good. So what you do in here is you basically can put in the steps of the funnel. And what's kind of cool is you can combine, because everything's an event. Well, and also maybe like a traffic source. But so you could track, if you just wanted to track page view. So say you have an e-commerce site. If you wanted to check like, product page, and then the next step, the cart, and then maybe the checkout, you could just enter those pages here, and then they'll populate here. And then you'll be able to quickly see where people are dropping off. So that's if you're looking strictly at pages, but you can also combine pages and actions. So if you look here, so they've got this first step is called first open visit. So that's basically when somebody hits your site. And then they do, well, okay, this isn't a great example, but let's say, you know, first start, but then I could do like the second step might be look at a product page. And then the next step, so say you use videos to promote your products. Well, the next step in the funnel could be like play video. So that's an action. So there your funnel is a behavioral thing, not necessarily a location. So you can kind of mix, you know, pages and actions, which I find pretty powerful. So again, this is going to go to doing a lot of planning. And I'm going to talk about that later. The other one I really like, the other exploration is this idea of path. It's kind of like a funnel, but the funnel one, you were looking at basically a specific path. Here you can kind of see all paths. So again, you'll enter here the nodes that you want to be able to search for. So like this is a node, this is a node. But so here, the very first step was people that started their visit. Here was, you know, anybody that did a page view. And then for the third step, they kind of go into more like behavioral descriptions. So like, did they view a promotion? Did they, you know, look at or new recent active user? Did they scroll? So, you know, you can choose what you want to measure here, and you can kind of see how people are kind of, you know, interacting with your site. So this one can be pretty powerful too. And then you can, you know, you can use these puzzle pieces over here. You can add segments to this thing to further kind of separate out. So it's pretty powerful. Yeah.
Hey, Kyle, we're close to the top of the hour. We could certainly schedule a part 2 of this if there's more to cover. But I wonder.
Yeah. Sorry, I've been going.
No worries. There's a lot to cover here.
Yeah.
I wonder if could we just pause and see if there's one or two questions that we can have answered before we
let's do it.
close up. I think Rosemary, did you have a question?
Yeah, Kyle, can we still do alerts so that, you know, looking at fewer page views one week over the next, for example?
Yes. I'm trying to remember where that is. I'm gonna have to let me look that up for our call, because there is a way to do it, and
okay.
I just forget which menu it's in. This is here's one. Let me jump ahead, Dennis, because I think people need the very last things.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
No worries.
I went a lot slower than I wanted to.
We can schedule a part 2 as well.
Okay, so what you should really take away is get this set up as soon as possible. You'll run it in parallel with your existing Universal Analytics. Don't stop using Universal Analytics. I kind of tell people that, you know, it'll be 90% of your reporting and analysis, and maybe 10% will come from GA4. For the love of God, do not remove Universal Analytics from your website. Just don't do that. I've run into that lately, and that you're going to lose a ton of valuable data. And start playing around with this. Google has a demo account. If you don't have access to an actual GA4 account, you can find that demo account very easily by Googling it. And here's kind of what that'll look like. So that's it, Dennis.
Thanks so much, Kyle. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has a question.
Is there anything new, anything new or interesting in demographics? I know that's sometimes a privacy concern, and I'd love to hear where that's going.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there's been it's pretty similar. I mean, obviously they're trying to address the whole cookie thing. You know, but I specific to this platform, I don't have a ton of information on that right now, but I can can dig into that. This is the platform is still in heavy development. And I have a feeling that, 6 months from now, they might just do a complete dump of new things into the platform. So you won't start using this full time for probably at least a year or two. But it has such a steep learning curve that everybody needs to just slowly start playing with it, because otherwise you're in for a big shock when, Google closes the door, or if they close the door on the other one, and you're stuck with just GA4.
All right, Kyle. Well, we do have a request in the chat to cover a part 2 for the areas you didn't have a chance to cover today. So I'll get in touch with you. But thanks so much for presenting today. I think we all have a lot to learn about GA4. And thanks everyone else for attending.
Thanks everybody for jumping in. Yeah, we'll definitely do a part 2.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Take care, everyone.